being brought to you virtually with Chuck Carroll from the Exam Room podcast. We've got sponsors, Mom's Organic Market and Evolution Vegan Academy, along with Green Fair and Plant-Based Diet. And we're thrilled to continue the interview today with Chuck Carroll from the Exam Room podcast. And he's going to be interviewing one of my favorites, Dr. Neal Barnard from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Dr. Neal Barnard has written over 20 books, and he's been working in this field for 35 years with PCRM. And I'm thrilled today to allow him to talk a little bit about COVID impact on his organization, your health, and talk a lot about his new book about hormones.
This is exciting. Hi, and Dr. Barnard, I'm so thrilled. We've done so many of these interviews on the Exam Room. I think that this may be the first time that you and I are doing one on a completely different platform. So I'm looking forward to this.
Me too. Me too. Glad to be with you today.
The pleasure is really all mine. And let's kind of start at the top here. COVID-19, everybody's going through this pandemic. It's taking such a heavy toll on all of our lives, just mass disruption. But it really did not have to be this way. One of the things that we've talked about so often on the Exam Room Live, which streams every Monday through Friday on noon Eastern on the Physicians Committee's Facebook page, one of the things that we've talked so frequently about is the origins of this virus coming from the wet markets, these exotic animal markets over in China. And same thing happened in 2003 with SARS, and flash forward, here we are to 2020, and we're in the same boat. Can you talk to us a little bit about how these wet markets are really kind of the origin of these outbreaks?
Yeah, I guess people have heard about this in Wuhan, China, that presumably the COVID-19 began in a bat, and bats may be their natural host, not just for COVID-19, but for other coronaviruses too. Here's the problem. People get an idea that they want to eat bats or other animals, and what do? They put them in a cage, and under that is another tier of cages, and under that is another one and another one, stacking up multiple animals, multiple species in far less than hygienic conditions. So you've got a virus in a bat, and that can then dribble down with bat feces into the cage where there are guinea pigs or other animals, you name it, they're there. And then you have workers watering them, feeding them, carrying them around, selling them, slaughtering them, eating them. And it doesn't take a lot for the virus to then leap into a human infection. The next step, though, is that if the human infection just dies out naturally, you're presumably all right, except for that one person who got sick. But the big step is if it then becomes human to human transferred. So person zero who got the virus from a bat then passes it along to others. That's when the pandemics arise. And Chuck, if you don't mind, can I share my screen with you?
By all means, yes.
Can I do that? I've got some images that I want to show you, if you don't mind. Let me see. Here we are.
I know this is something you've spent a lot of time looking into.
Okay, let me skip ahead here because I've got some other things I want to tell you about. Okay, these are the typical wet markets, or I call them just live animal markets. And the key here really is that, can you see this okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay, all right. So as you can see, there's one cage on top of another on top of another. And this is in Asia, but it could just as well have been in the United States. But here's what I want to mention. In the United States, we have many of these. In New York City alone, there are more than 80 live animal markets. And in 2015, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention did a review of influenza viruses in live markets in Minnesota. They went into St. Paul, Minnesota, and they went into a live market where they had pigs and poultry, all kinds of animals. They found influenza A viruses in 86% of the pigs. They took air samples and they found influenza viruses in 67% of the air samples, meaning you're walking through the market, you work there or you're a customer and you're inhaling it. And then they swabbed the pen railings, about 1 in 4 had them. Then they did nasal swabs of the employees of the live market. And yes, that figure
Wow.
you're saying is right. 65% of the employees now had taken and were harboring the influenza virus. Then a customer developed influenza symptoms from this. And at that point, it apparently stopped there. But this is 5 years ago. So what the CDC then said was, if efficiently transmitted among humans, novel influenza A viruses might have pandemic potential. This was 5 years ago, predicting exactly what did happen in Wuhan, only they were talking about it happening in St. Paul. So here's what we're concerned about. These viruses come up all the time. This was 3 weeks ago, I think it was. An avian flu was found in South Carolina turkeys. It's an H7N3, and these arise, frankly, all the time. Many of them are not terribly pathogenic. They don't make the birds terribly sick. In this case, it was highly pathogenic. And if you just think back a few years, in 2015, there was an avian flu breakout where 48 million birds were killed. Either they were killed by the disease or they had to be culled so that they couldn't be sold. The only other thing that has to happen is you simply have to make the leap into human-to-human transmission, and you've got a pandemic. So this has been predicted. This is just like taking a whole bunch of sticks and having a match about 3 inches away from them and hoping you don't get a fire. So last thing I just want to mention in this is in the state of South Dakota, the governor has been very concerned because COVID-19 is making its entrance there, just like in every other state. But of all the people in the state of South Dakota who have COVID-19 now, more than half of them work in this single building. This is the Smithfield Pig Slaughterhouse. And this is a huge facility. 1 in every 20 pork chops consumed in the United States comes out of that building. And so Chuck, you and I have talked about this, where the Smithfield said, all right, we're stuck. We've got to close the place down, except we've got some pork carcasses in there. So let the employees come back in and prepare them and sell them. So that's what's happened with Smithfield. Smithfield is closing other facilities too. It's just a dirty business. You've got the animals bringing in viruses. You have people working at close quarters. It is not a picture of hygiene. And perhaps even worse are these poultry farms where you have chickens shoulder to shoulder, and particularly on what's called the Delmarva Peninsula, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, where you have huge numbers of birds raised. And there are such problems now with chicken slaughter that the slaughterhouses are suffering their loss of employees. They can't slaughter as quickly as they used to. So what's happening now is that the chicken growers are killing their chickens, not in the slaughterhouse, but in the sheds where they're raised, and throwing the carcasses basically into a landfill, or whatever the equivalent of that is, that you do on a chicken farm. They're basically giving up on their product. Now, I have to say that it may well be that this is going to be beneficial for human health to the extent that animal agriculture diminishes a bit. So anyway, Chuck, it's not a pretty scene, I have to say. But the point is, these wet markets exist. They exist in Wuhan. They may well be coming back in Wuhan, but they exist in Manhattan. They exist in Brooklyn. They exist in California. They're in Florida. I just was talking about the ones in St. Paul, and it's time for these things to be shut down.
And I think that that's something that the majority of Americans just have blinders on, to the fact that these markets, we hear about them and say, oh, well, that is over in China. That would never happen here. But they are within walking distance of your home, and you just have no idea. I remember you were talking there, you said there was something north of 50 or 60 in New York alone.
Yeah, 80, more, yeah, north of 80.
I mean, that is
80
just...
of them, that's right. And it's been extremely controversial. New Yorkers do not like the stench of chicken feces and blood and so forth coming out. It's time for this to be ended. Now, it's controversial, as you can imagine. There are some religious groups that like this sort of thing. But religion has to accommodate to emerging health threats. And they do, and every religion has to deal with this. So I think that it's just a matter of time before these are ended, and soon is not really soon enough. It's got to happen right away.
Yeah, And what do you think that the end result will be now that these processing plants are being shut down? You referenced the one that was in South Dakota, that Smithfield plant, but we're seeing that at poultry farms. There's headlines all over the place this week about there being a potential beef shortage now because of similar outbreaks at beef processing plants. What do you think the end result will be as far as people perhaps taking meat off of their plate because of this?
Yeah, well, it's like a cigarette shortage, or a cocaine shortage. I think that to the extent that people learn to eat something else, that's a good thing. Obviously, COVID-19 is a disaster. It's a disaster in every possible way. But on the other hand, if those people who don't succumb to that realize that they should eat better, that's a good thing. Which, by the way, brings up a related topic, Chuck. You and I have talked about the racial disparities that relate to underlying health conditions. And that's something we should talk about now as well.
Absolutely. That was just going to be my transition, is that you hear about so many of these deaths and the comorbidities that come along with COVID-19. It's 90% almost of everybody who dies has at least one underlying condition. And at the top of the list are conditions that are largely preventable. Heart disease, one of the top ones, hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, dementia is on that top 5 list in New York State as well. But the majority of those, Dr. Barnard, are something that we have the ability to largely control with our diet.
Oh, we do. Let me show you a few more images, if I may. Okay. Oops, sorry. Coming back. Okay. You mentioned, you're right, 9 out of 10 COVID-related deaths are related to underlying medical conditions, and the ones you mentioned, high blood pressure, diabetes, and of course, it's a respiratory virus, so lung diseases. And that would include asthma. It would include smoking. It would include vaping and heart disease. These, if you catch the virus, never a good thing. But many people throw it off. But if your lungs are already attacked, if your heart is already attacked, you are much more likely to end up in the ICU or to die of it. And where I'm particularly concerned is when we look at statistics by race. And in Milwaukee County, as of April 3rd, African Americans were 26% of the population, but they were 81% of COVID deaths. When you looked at the state of Michigan, April 3rd, again, African Americans, 14% of the population, 40% of deaths. And here in DC, African Americans, about 46% of the population, but way into the majority of deaths. And there are many, many reasons for that, of course. It could have to do, obviously, with different jobs that different people have. It may have to do with access to medical care. All of these things play roles. But we have to, I think, also look at underlying medical conditions. And obesity, if you look at Blacks versus whites, non-Hispanic Black adults, 38% prevalence of obesity, and whites, 29%. If you look at diabetes in Black adults in the United States, 12%, in whites, 7%. If you look at hypertension, dramatically more prevalent, 41% in Black adults, 28% in white adults. The question then is, okay, what do I do about it? And a person might say, I'll take medicine. And medicines are often good. Lisinopril is what we call an ACE inhibitor. There are also ARBs. These lower blood pressure. They're very effective. Problem is that in China, as soon as the pandemic really took off, people noticed very soon that many people with hypertension were dying of this disease, way out of proportion to their population prevalence. And what we're concerned about is it the high blood pressure that's making the COVID deaths more likely? Or is it the medications used to treat it? And it turns out that the virus enters the lung cells through something called the angiotensin converting enzyme 2. And if you're taking lisinopril or any other ACE inhibitor or an ARB, these are among the most common blood pressure medicines. If you're taking them, your body makes more of those enzymes that are the welcomate for the virus. Now, stay tuned. We really don't yet know whether it's the high blood pressure itself or the medications or both that are causing problems. But we have been pushing people to think about diet because if you eat in a healthier way, you can bring your blood pressure down and very rapidly. This is the DASH study. This goes way back. This is a classic, huge blood pressure study that showed diet works. This is more than 20 years ago. The top line here is blood pressure in people who made no diet changes. Blood pressure didn't improve much over the 8 weeks of the study. The second line is people who increased vegetables and fruits. Note to self, vegetables and fruits lower blood pressure. The third line is people who increased vegetables and fruits, but also reduced meat and reduced fat. And as you can see, their blood pressure fell a lot. And this is systolic blood pressure. That's the top number, like 120/80. This is the top number is systolic. Now here's diastolic. Same thing. If you increase vegetables and fruits, reduce meat, reduce fat, your blood pressure drops a lot. But look at that. Where it drops is by the 2-week point. So in other words, let's say I'm a person, I've got high blood pressure, I'm concerned that I'm at real risk. If you go on a plant-based diet now, you're eating vegetables and fruits, you're avoiding the meat, you're avoiding the animal fat, you can keep fats in general very low, your blood pressure will be lower in 14 days. Same with diabetes. This is our own diabetes research. The red line here is the improvement in blood sugar control in people on a conventional diet. The blue line is on a vegan diet. And by 11 weeks, your A1C was down by about a full point practically. So what do? If you are at risk, stop smoking, get your medications together, implement diet changes, put it to work.
And I think that that's such an important message that you talking about here, Dr. Barnard, is I think that people might be saying, well, okay, a diet can certainly help me, but the virus is already here. If I make a change today, it's not going to do any bit of good. But you just showed what can happen in just 2 weeks with blood pressure. I'm curious, to that accord, we hear so much about inflammation being also associated with this. If somebody adjusts to a plant-based diet, how quickly can they reduce the inflammation that's in their body?
Well, it happens very rapidly. There's a blood test that we use and that frankly many clinics use. It's called CRP or C-reactive protein. It's an inexpensive test that doctors often use as a measure of inflammation in a person's body. That's how much are the white blood cells reacting inappropriately. And CRP levels fall very predictably when people get on a healthy plant-based diet, and they do so within a matter of weeks.
I remember reading one particular study this past week about how the younger people who were becoming more susceptible to the virus, they found that the vast majority of them were obese, and researchers believe that it was directly associated with the inflammation in their body that put them at such high risk. And of course, that risk just grew as the people got older. So, the fact that you can turn things around so quickly with a diet, I think is key, because it just showed that it's, there's something that you can do and you can do right now. And
I was just talking with one
quickly.
of our, I was just talking with one of our clinicians in Philadelphia, and she told me she's really on the front lines in the hospital. And she said, when people are obese, you get them on ventilators, you can't get them off the ventilators. Their lungs are so shot. The disease process is so serious. So what you said, Chuck, is exactly right. The obesity complicates this situation. It not only makes you more likely to end up in the ICU, it makes you more likely to have a really bad course. That's the bad news. Good news is that you and others have really been shining a light on how to get your weight down, how to keep it down through diet changes. And there's no time like the present.
I do feel grateful every day to not have that 420-pound body anymore, because if I did today, I would be just petrified about what is outside my window right now. And, I want so badly to be able to help others who are still in that situation understand that the weight may not come off overnight, but you can experience dramatic improvements very quickly and have those already in your pocket as that weight continues to come down. And that, just knowing that you're already on that path, for somebody who's on that and doing that at the time, it is so important to know that that progress is already being made. So that is a very, very great point.
Yes.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your book, Your Body in Balance, all about hormones and diet. This is something that before the pandemic hit, you and I were discussing also very, very much. Off the top, hormones and diet, how closely are they connected?
Surprisingly closely connected. And yet this is one of the areas of diet that people haven't really thought about too much. People know that diet affects your weight. They know that foods affect, as we talked about, your blood pressure and diabetes and heart health. But what people haven't thought about is that foods could affect fertility or menstrual cramps or breast cancer or prostate cancer. But all of these conditions have one thing in common, and that's that they are all fueled by hormones. And hormones can indeed be controlled by your diet. And so that's the message that I've wanted to get out. That's the message of your body in balance.
And some of the people who are featured in your book have just really had a rough go of it before they made adjustments to their diet. You mentioned cramps, and I believe Lindsay Nixon, who put together all of these wonderful recipes who were part of the book, she was telling me that she would get doubled over in pain to the point where she couldn't leave the house. She would literally throw herself on top of the sofa to try to put pressure on her stomach area to alleviate the cramps. And when that wouldn't work, Dr. Barnard, she asked her roommate to literally stand on her stomach just to get the pain to go away. When you hear something like that, really, what is going on inside of her?
That's really what started me down this path in the first place. It was many years ago, I got a call from a young woman who had exactly that issue. Maybe 1 in 10 women suffers from pretty bad cramps, and they see their doctor who will prescribe ibuprofen, or sometimes they'll put them on the pill. But often the relief is incomplete. What we started to discover is the cause of it is estrogens. Estrogens are female hormones that every month they thicken the lining of the uterus in anticipation of pregnancy. But if there's too much estrogen in the blood, the lining thickens up too much. And as it thickens up, what happens is at the end of the month, when that lining is discarded, the cramps are really severe. So you can reduce the amount of estrogen in your blood by changing what you eat. And I know that's very surprising to people, but it's true. Step one, fiber will reduce estrogens. Now, fiber is a boring word, but it's an important thing. It's plant roughage. And fiber simply means the roughage in vegetables and beans and fruits and whole grains. And when your liver removes estrogens from the bloodstream, it sends them into the intestinal tract, and fiber grabs them and carries them away. But if you don't have fiber in your diet, then the estrogens are reabsorbed back into the blood. And so fiber brings estrogens down. Avoiding cheese. Americans all love cheese all over their pizza and so forth, but cheese doesn't love you back. Cheese has hormones that come from the cow. And in fact, the estrogens that are in cheese are implicated in reducing fertility in men. Researchers have looked at fertility clinics, and the men who eat the most cheese have the lowest sperm counts. And we've seen lots of women who do very, very well when they get away from animal products, away from dairy products. And so if somebody listening to this has cramps, let me encourage you to try 2 things for the next, say, 2 months. No animal products at all, gonna be vegan, and keep all oily foods very low. That's vegetable oils, peanut butter, maybe avocados, that's about it. And so it's avoiding animal products, avoiding oily foods, and that will bring the amount of estrogen down, and see if you don't feel better at the end of the month.
If that's new to somebody, they might be saying to themselves, well, wait a minute, I've heard that olive oil and coconut oil, they're healthy for me. Why would you want to take those out of the diet?
We don't, well, there are other reasons too, but we don't really know why, but for whatever reason, fatty foods raise estrogen levels. Researchers at Tufts University brought in a large group of women and just tested them on low-fat diets, high-fat diets, low-fiber diets, high-fiber diets. And they found that to get estrogen down, you need to increase fiber and reduce fat. They both work together.
Let's talk about infertility a little bit. One of the people featured in the book was Catherine Lawrence, and this is just a phenomenal story that she has. This is someone who, I mean, really, everybody should be looking up to her. She was infertile. I believe she had endometriosis, and that was so closely tied to her diet. Can you just share her story with us? Because it is just truly remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. Catherine Lawrence was an Air Force aerospace engineer. She was over in Iraq in 2003. And I think the story really begins when she got back from Iraq. And her friends decided to make up for all the foods that she was missing overseas. And so she would tuck into a lot of cheese dishes, mac and cheese and other things. She started gaining weight, but she developed endometriosis, which is this terrible pain in your abdomen. It comes from cells that normally line the uterus, but they've escaped, and they're They're all around the abdomen, and they implant and they swell and they hurt. And this was her situation. Now, for some women, it's somewhat painful. For some women, it's excruciating, and she was in the excruciating category. There was no treatment for it that worked. Painkillers didn't work. Hormone treatments didn't work. So finally, her doctor suggested a hysterectomy. And she was 27, and she and her husband hadn't raised a family yet. So she was not super enthusiastic about the idea of having her uterus removed. But her doctor told her she was probably infertile anyway from the disease process, from the endometriosis itself. So she agreed to have it, to have the hysterectomy. But before she could have it, a friend sent her to a nutrition expert who put her on the diet I just described, vegan, low fat, and her endometriosis improved dramatically. But the pain wasn't entirely gone. So she went back to the hospital to have the procedure. But when the doctor opened her up, he didn't do it. He woke her up from the anesthesia, and he said, "You don't have endometriosis anymore. The pain that you've got now is just scarring from where it used to be, and you had some adhesions that I removed, but something has made the endometriosis itself go away." And her mother was in the room with her, the recovery room, and said, "She went vegan." And of course, the doctor said, "No, that's not it. Endometriosis has nothing to do with diet." The doctor thought this was just a miracle. I have to say kudos to the doctor for not doing the hysterectomy. He opened her up, he found her endometriosis is gone, he left her uterus in place, good on him. But where he dropped the ball was he didn't realize that endometriosis is driven by estrogen, and that the diet brings endometriosis down.
You mentioned that her diet played that significant role. You kind of glossed over macaroni and cheese. This is something I need for you to talk a little bit more about, because we're not just talking about macaroni and cheese every now and again. Catherine Lawrence loves some macaroni and cheese.
She had a friend of hers actually knew of her desire for macaroni and cheese. A friend gave her an entire case of mac and cheese, 48 boxes, and Catherine ate them for 48 days in a row. I am not kidding. So she did gain weight. She got endometriosis, but she still has a uterus. She never had the operation. She never had the hysterectomy. She was not infertile. She has 3 children now. She's one of our Food for Life instructors. And by the way, let me give a shout out for anybody who's looking in their community for someone to help them make a diet transition. Our Food for Life instructors are a great resource, and just look on the Physicians Committee website, you'll see them. Chuck, hold on for me. I just need to adjust something over here. I'm coming right back.
I will stall. I will tell you, I had the opportunity to actually travel down to the Dallas area to meet with Catherine in person. And she has been so moved by her own transformation that she's devoted her entire life now to helping others achieve the same kind of health that she now has. She has this incredible store where she does cooking demonstrations and classes, the Food for Life classes. It's called Food Saved Me. And Dr. Barnard, I can't think of a more appropriate title for her restaurant or her business than Food Saved Me.
You said it exactly.
Another common issue that was featured in your book is PCOS. And one of the women who I interviewed also that is featured in your book is Allison Tierney. Grew up horrible PCOS, and then she gets married and she thinks she's never going to be able to have children. A story kind of similar to Catherine's, but PCOS is a different condition altogether. What's the connection between that and hormones and diet?
Yeah, Allison, and by the way, I'm so grateful to all the people who lent their personal experiences for my book, Your Body in Balance, because for me as a physician, I dig up the research and I show people how it works, but there's nothing like hearing a person who's put this to work in their own life, and they've suffered with a condition, and then you make a diet change and things get better, and you're very compelled to let other people know. So I'm super grateful. And yeah, Allison Tierney lives outside of, not super far from the Milwaukee area. And she is a registered dietitian herself and has helped so many people with cancer to change their diets to hopefully improve their prognosis. And she's an excellent dietitian. But she herself had a problem, and that was PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome. And the name is kind of a misnomer. It's the idea is you have cysts on your ovaries. Some women have the cysts, some do not. What the condition really is, it's you have just a little bit too much in the way of androgens in the blood. Everybody, all women have some female sex hormones, a little bit of male hormones. Men, same way. Men have more male hormones, a little bit of female hormones. Everybody gets both. But in PCOS, just on a genetic basis, there's a little bit extra male hormone. Not much, but just enough. You look in the mirror and you see kind of a little dark hair here or whatever, and it goofs up fertility. And eventually, she just, I mean, her cycle was just not functioning at all. She wouldn't ovulate, totally unpredictable. And she and her husband had all but given up the idea of having a child. But at some point, Allison said, well, let me change my own diet. I'm counseling so many other women, let me counsel myself. And she adopted a totally plant-based diet. And very rapidly, she had a normal ovulation, normal period, and got pregnant. And she now has a beautiful baby, and you should see the pictures of Allison and her husband and her little baby. And the idea is, a diet change doesn't make PCOS really go away. I mean, the genes that are there are still there, but what it does is it gets the hormones back into balance. And there's another piece of this. When women have polycystic ovaries, they're often insulin resistant. The cells of their body are misbehaving very much like type 2 diabetes. And as you know, a vegan diet is the best way to tackle type 2 diabetes. Get the fat out of your diet, get the animal products out. So Allison now is just a picture of health and a tremendous advocate for a healthy plant-based diet.
So we've talked about endometriosis, we've talked about PCOS. Not every woman will have those, thankfully, but every woman will eventually go through menopause. And that's something that's also addressed in your book. And I had the opportunity to speak with Anne, who is featured in there. And Anne is quite the character. I mean, this is a woman who, was just a trailblazer, worked on the telephone lines back in the day. I mean, hauling heavy cable with her, then became a police officer. But she also was featured in the book because she was able to control her hot flashes by making adjustments to a diet. And I know hot flashes are a major concern for so many women. How does a diet affect those, Dr. Barnard?
Yeah, Anne's story really grabbed me, I have to say, because hot flashes are bad for anybody, but they're especially bad if you're wearing a bulletproof vest and a gun belt. And the way to hear Anne describe it, she says, look, you can't just like flip open your shirt and air yourself off. You've got all these layers of bulletproof everything, because she was a cop in Portland. Anyway, what she hit on was she discovered that soy products could help. Now there's specific ways that people do it. In some cases, you go to the store, you buy some soy milk or tofu or whatever, and that may help some women. However, some women, and Anne was in this group, where you need a little bit more. And so she was using a specific soy powder. And you can take this and you just put it in a smoothie with some bananas or soy milk or whatever. She had it every morning, and she would notice that the hot flashes weren't 100% gone, but they were just turned way down. And she thought, all right, I can live without this. And then if she would stop using it, they would come back. So if you take 10 women and put them on soy powders and things like that, my guess is that not everybody is going to have an effect, but maybe 4 out of 10 are going to have an effect. And if you use the higher doses, my guess is that more women will have them. And there's no danger to it. I should perhaps mention this, because some people hear the word soy and they think soy has estrogens that will cause breast cancer. Soy has isoflavones that actually reduce cancer risk. There's been a lot of study of this phenomenon, and women consuming the most soy have about 30% lower risk of developing breast cancer. And women who have had breast cancer in the past have, again, roughly 30% less risk of their cancer coming back or of dying of it. So soy products are good. You don't have to have them, they're totally optional, but they don't cause cancer, they reduce cancer risk.
I'll tell you, your message is really resonating. I love this comment that somebody has already posted, a woman by the name of Jessie. She writes, hormones can be controlled by diet. Wow, that is great news. So the message is really hitting. Before we wrap things up, I also want to talk about the hormonal connection with diabetes, because I don't think that a lot of people associate diabetes necessarily with hormones if they're not, too immersed in medicine and nutrition and things like that. They say, well, diabetes is all about blood sugar, but that's also one of the topics that's covered in your book. What is the connection there?
Okay. Very, very, very important. And I'm glad you raised this, because so many people imagine that diabetes came from having a soda or some bread, because bread digests to release sugar in the blood. And people are aware that diabetes means there's too much sugar in your blood, too much glucose. But it's important to understand that glucose is normal. It's a natural sugar that comes from foods, and your body is designed to run on glucose. So the glucose goes from your bloodstream into the cells of your body, and your cells can use it. When type 2 diabetes arises because the cells are not taking that glucose in properly. In fact, do you mind, I'm going to show you a screen. Let me share my screen again.
Go right ahead.
I got something I just want to, here we are, okay. This is a cell. That big blue thing is a cell in your body. They call it a muscle cell, for example. And the glucose is on the right. And that glucose, those little dots, need to go through those funny purple channels to get inside the cell. And that they don't get in until the insulin key, insulin is like a key, see it over there on the right. Those keys attach to those red receptors. And once the insulin key attaches to the receptor, it signals those channels to open up. And here now the glucose comes into the cell, just like that, okay? So if a person has type 2 diabetes, here's how it starts. They've got insulin, they got receptors, they got all this stuff, all that machinery is working fine, except those yellow globs that you see. That's fat, beef fat, chicken fat, fish oil, fryer grease, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. All that fat inside the cell makes the insulin not work anymore. So, by the way, doctors hate words like fat because it has only one syllable. So our technical term is intramyocellular lipid. But the point is this: if you got diabetes, the reason that you have type 2 diabetes is that fat building up in the cell is making your insulin not work. So let's say I go on a vegan diet. How much animal fat is there? There isn't any. And if I keep the oils low, that fat starts dissipating and your insulin can work again. So let me unscreen share and give this back to you. But the point being that diabetes does not have to be a one-way street. This is something that can get better, and it can get dramatically better and very, very fast.
And what about, I think so many people who are watching this, I'm sure, are nutrition conscious themselves and are already eating a plant-based diet, but we all have people in our lives who aren't there yet and probably have diabetes. Maybe somebody in your life has had diabetes for decades at this point. What is something that we can tell those people about, well, it's never too late, even though you've had this for 2 decades?
Oh, Chuck, I have to tell you, we have done research studies in people who not only have had this disease a long time, but they're already getting serious complications. There's frankly a really bad complication called neuropathy, where the diabetes is attacking your nerves. And so your feet either get numb, so you can't feel anything, and that's where you step on some glass and you get a cut that won't heal and you end up with an amputation, or sometimes even worse, is that your nerves are acting up so that you feel stabbing pain or pins and needles all the time, miserable. We brought in a large group of people who all had long-standing diabetes with neuropathy, and we put them on a low-fat vegan diet. And I've got to tell you, they improve too. Their blood sugars come down, they start losing weight, the neuropathy improves. Now, everybody gets a different result. And I have to say, the sooner I get to you, the better. But there is never a time when it's too late to make a diet change. And I'm going to share my screen just one last time with you real quick, because I want to make a little plug for people actually getting some care.
You are a screen sharing machine today.
Thank you for indulging me. There's things that I just want to let people know about. When COVID-19 arrived, as you know, we were already doing telemedicine visits, but many people really wanted them. So let me strongly encourage people. If you've got diabetes now, wherever you may be, see your doctor, get some help, start a low-fat vegan diet. But if your doctor isn't too savvy with it, or your dietitian isn't, call us. We'll be glad to help you. We're a nonprofit clinic. We take insurances, we take Medicare, Medicaid, and we can help you if you are in New York, California, Maryland, Virginia, Massachusetts, Missouri, Washington, D.C. You just call that number, 202-527-7500. And we'd be more than happy. An actual human being will pick up the phone and say, yes, we can make an appointment. How's this afternoon at 2 o'clock? It's the most wonderful thing. The clinicians love it, but the patients love it. And you can get appointments very rapidly, and it's really, really fun. So anyway, thank you, Chuck, for letting me share that.
An actual human being will answer the phone. What a concept in this day and age, right? And real quick, as we wrap things up, the woman who was featured on there, the doctor, that was Dr. Vanita Raman. And she and I actually had the opportunity to, on the exam room recently, walk through the entire telehealth process because it's new to so many of us. And she really put a lot of those questions to bed as far as, well, what happens when you need a prescription, or what about if you need blood work? And really the process is so simple that anybody can do it. You remember, Dr. Barnard, I'm sure the old house calls that doctors used to do way back when. I look at this as kind of the 21st century house call, where you don't even have to leave the comfort of your own home now. You can do these visits in your pajamas. Well, it's so important. Let's say you have somebody who's in rural Virginia. Let's say it's a snowy day, a rainy day, or let's say COVID makes you not want to go outside. And people say, well, even if I do go to the medical clinic, they've never heard of a vegan diet. They're not going to help me. They just tell me to get used to the idea of injecting myself with insulin. I don't need that. And so frankly, that's the reason we started telemedicine. And we began in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. So you can be in Norfolk or Virginia Beach or Roanoke or wherever. We're more than happy to help you out. But then we were hearing from people in New York and California, and other places who need help too. And not everything works with telehealth. If I need to put a stethoscope on your chest and listen to your heart, you got to be physically in the same room. But for so many other things, like dealing with diabetes medications and high blood pressure and so forth, just like as in the doctor's office, you're talking back and forth. And as you said, if we need to send you for an x-ray, if we need to send you for a blood test, if we need to send you to the pharmacy to get a prescription, we can do all those things. And we can follow up with you. And part of the reason that it's become popular is it's so fast. Very, very often a person will call us at 10 in the morning for an appointment. That appointment, we can see them the very same day. So glad to do it. And let's not forget, so again, so many people watching this right now are probably, I would say, in pretty good health. They eat a plant-based diet. They try to take care of themselves. So if you want to refine that, I know that there are just some wonderful dietitians at the Barnard Medical Center as well. Lee Crosby, Susan Levin, so many people there that will actually take a look at your diet and break it down for you and try to get you, you think that you're here, but they can get you up here even, and really get you humming. They really can. So our website is barnardmedical.org, and the number is 202-527-7500, and we'd be more than happy to help people out. And real quick, final thoughts here as we wrap this up. Somebody's watching this, again, they've got a friend or a family member who they love just so dearly with a number of these underlying conditions during this pandemic. They're concerned. Do you have any advice on how to even begin that conversation with that person? Yes, a few things. First of all, it's fine to just begin the conversation and talk about it. But in some cases, you need to share a few more things. For example, you're sitting around and Netflix is right in front of you. So why not pull up Forks Over Knives or What the Health or the big new blockbuster, The Game Changers? Watch it together. And if your reluctant spouse is tired of you talking about vegan diets, and they, once they see it from somebody else, they'll say, honey, this is just what you've been telling me about. But it's believable if it's somebody else telling you. So anyway, those movies are great.
There also obviously are books that people can look at, like my new book, Your Body in Balance. Or frankly, they should go on and listen to podcasts like The Exam Room. Once people hear this message from other people, it's often very engaging. When people are home and they are cooking, this is a great time to explore new things to eat. So many people are making soups and bean dishes and vegan chili and things like that. Go ahead. Now is the perfect time to put orange cones around the kitchen. Don't let anybody else in there. You're the only expert. You make it, they'll eat it. So have fun.
If you make it, they will eat it. That's kind of like that line from Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. I like your version. That's just the vegan version of that. Dr. Barnard, thank you so much for your time today. This has really been so enlightening. Again, the book, Your Body in Balance, is available at Amazon and your favorite book retailers. I'm sure that they have websites as well that you can pick up the book. It's a phenomenal read. And I know that that's also a book that you designed that people can get through relatively quickly. You don't have to sit there, and it's not War and Peace.
That's right. It's the whole idea is to make it engaging and informative. But as you mentioned at the beginning, Lindsay Nixon did all the recipes. And when she sent the recipes, there are 65 of them. And she sent a note saying that this way of eating made her cramps go away too. So shout out to Lindsay Nixon. She's a great genius, I have to say, when it comes to recipe development. And I was delighted to work with her on Your Body in Balance.
And 3 words about those recipes: apple pie nachos. That is one of the recipes that Lindsay has come up with. Apple pie nachos. Had never even thought about this in a million years, but oh my goodness gracious, are they ever delicious. This is a home run. It will get you healthy, and it will definitely be a palate pleaser for everybody under your roof. Dr. Neal Barnard, thank you so very much for your time, my friend. You stay safe, and we will talk to you soon on The Exam Room.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right, stick around. Coming up at 11:45, I will be joined by Cortland Malloy. This is a phenomenal story of transformation. Longtime writer at the Washington Post. Now he has his own weight loss story to share. He is truly the pillar of a plant-based success. 11:45, come right on back.